If one went wary of talking about conspiracy, one would say that there was clearly a conspiracy against blacks in this country. Because in all parts of this country that you look, they're looking at Ladbroke Grove in London, or Brixton in London, or Moss Side in Manchester, or Handsworth in Birmingham. In all the parts that you look at, it's clear that the state, at top national level and certainly at local level, the state has moved to manipulate blacks in any way that it's wanted to. In this area, this used to be called in those days Brown Town, because a lot of black people had settled in this area. Most of those people are now, in fact, a large number of them have moved out of this area. They've been moved out by rehousing and however else institutionalized racism works to mobilize black people into places where they want them. In places like Moss Side, it's more devastating. It's clearer that they've just moved through areas where black people, for a longer period now, Moss Side clearly has a much longer history of black presence than Ladbroke Grove. I mean, Ladbroke Grove begins to have black presence in the 50s, in the mid-50s, and thereon. Moss Side has one that goes way back, certainly into the Second World War period. In 1945, as most people now know, there was actually a Pan-African Congress which was held there because there was a strong black community there. Now that community, in this more recent period of heavy racism in the society, has just been mown down, destroyed, completely destroyed, in a way viciously.
The excuse was that Manchester was developing a ghetto. Ghettos, as had been seen from the American experience, were bad things because out of ghettos came riots and so on, and they were determined not to let it happen here. So that it now became necessary during the late 60s to find a way of containing this very threatening presence, and the way that was found was the destruction of the black community. All along here there used to be black people's houses, Carter Street and Monton Street and so on.
I mean, I was born around here, and it gets you very angry that you face it and say, well, you've got to go wherever they've got places for you. This is before they even consider anything else. It's not an ideal community, but it is a community where people know one another, and you don't want to move out. We've got a lot of old people, we've got a lot of black people in the area that feel very strongly about it.
We, as a community, fought a long campaign to persuade the city council to refurbish these houses, to bring them up to an acceptable living standard. What happened was that they chose to bulldoze the lot. Many of the people who owned these sorts of houses were ripped off in a peculiarly brutal way, because after paying for a mortgage for perhaps 10 years, people received as little as £50 in what was called bricks and mortar value for their homes. The £50 was just enough to pay about 2 weeks rent for the new flats that the council offered as an alternative to homes. So that what you have here in Hume, which is interesting at least because it is the area in which Engels did much of his work for the book The Conditions of the English Working Classes. This is precisely the same area. It's interesting because the black people have now become the new underclass that structures British society by being maintained at the bottom. So what they meant was, by integrating black people at the very bottom of society with the worst families who had the major kinds of problems and so on, and had fallen to the bottom of white society. This, in fact, satisfied the city, and they felt that their policy was successful. They advertised it widely throughout Europe as an answer to the problem of black people. There are 2 entrances only, and this means that in a situation of social control, if, for instance, one of the famous British black riots develop or whatever, because they make these things when they decide to, it is perfectly feasible and easy to control these buildings because there are only 2 points of access. And a relatively small force of army or police can control all these, all the people within these buildings.
We didn't know that, Joe. Yeah.
Andy, play that top.
Hold it. Oh, it's a good find. Great.
Huh?
Oh. Nice. Good beer. Well done.
I think the whole point is that the British school, in fact, does negate the personality of black children, and it doesn't do so accidentally, that it actually sets out to remove any feature that might threaten the society. And of course, since the society has defined blackness as a threatening feature, what happens is a kind of deliberate attempt at inducing a psychosis in the child's mind, so that whatever it isn't black. And I think that one of the things that the Saturday school does is motivate children and engender the demand in the community for our children to have that right to be black, to understand and be proud of what they are.
We are a community bookshop. Each year since we've been here, we've had sessions where we talk about culture, art, music, history, and we have had quite a lot of people coming from the black community, writers and journalists and artists and musicians coming here and giving the kids that which is lacking in the present school system at the moment.
Is everybody ready? Yeah! Are we going to sing? Yeah! Over here? Yeah! Yeah! Go on, midfield! Move it. Jay, midfield. Go on. Cracking, right. Come on. Ready, go. Greg, touch. Go.
We'll have to drifting through school. What can we say that I said? Because, you know, it's like, you get all these, you know, when you're in the system and like say, a careers officer come and say, well, you too can become a doctor. And there's a finger on the wall pointing at you and say, you can become a teacher. You can go in the army and all this kind of thing. So my mind was completely lost, really. You know, it's like, I was going through, you know, all the people coming to you and saying, you can do this and you can do that.
It's all right. I did a few O-levels and then kind of something.
You see?
I left and, you know.
He didn't know himself until he knew me.
So you did it, well, yeah.
I mean, it's something that was sort of generated from school. They're saying, you're going to want a car, you're going to want a house, and you got to do this and you got to do that, and you want to earn a wage above a certain amount, and it's all drummed into you, you know. Time after time, you're going to need this and you're going to want that, you know, and so on. You're going to need a holiday at least once a year and all them things, you know, and you got to study, you know. And what they didn't tell you was that you're black, and we're going to stop you doing all this. You know, we're going to do our best to stop you getting all this, you know.
If we are simply here saying, okay, we understand all the problems and we're crying about it, then the man will come along and shift us. He'll shift us from here, he'll shift us from wherever we are, because we are on his land, we are on his premises. I'm saying that what we have to do is to hold land, create institutions, places that young people can move around.
No, one of these, not post-debate, it's just ordinary. No,
that one's not.
No, this one's better.
No, this one is the
Look, there's Unity itself. This is that. That's really good.
So when you see me?
Yeah.
Now who's that?
Thing's brother, Delby's brother.
Who?
Delby's brother.
Mom.
Yeah.
I like that one.
No, this one's better than that one. This one.
They got more to be put up, haven't they?
Yeah.
Love, Jar Love. That one's nice. How about that one?
Embodied in this short space is a restaurant, a supermarket, a combination of a record shop and a book shop, and a Center for West Indian Handicraft. The reason for this development is mainly to provide jobs, to establish some form of independence in this area, and to project in the area generally that young black people, because it will be young black people involved in this project here, can actually move in their community and do constructive work. We envisage that in the region of 30 jobs will come out of this particular scheme, and that is a fair amount in an area where you probably already know that the unemployment is very high.
When you go for a job and you go in for an interview, you talk pretty on the phone to the guy. Then when you come through the door and he sort of sees your face, seeing that you're black, he's trying to hide his shop, but underneath on, you know, such and such, and then you're gone. You got no chance. Job centres and all that, they all try, you know what I mean? But it's nothing really. Don't get now. Lucky ones. Say like you have to be better than them to get the same privileges as them. So
in the past 2 weeks, I've been down there every day, and every day I go in and just look at the same board, and I see the same jobs on it and everything. Just make me sick. I feel bad when I see them.
Then when you're fed up without finding a job, and then you come out at night, the police are pressuring you. Every little thing you do, you can't even walk the street. They're picking you up, beat you up or something like that, and then you're up at court for something stupid.
we began to arrive in Britain in large numbers in the mid-1950s. The places we came from were stagnating economically after years of colonial exploitation. The Caribbean, India, Pakistan. We were waiting there, in a sense, like a massive pool of labor with a history of having to move in order to work. Jobs on the buses and the underground, in the sweatshops, in the foundries, in the hospitals. We did the dirty jobs, the uncomfortable jobs, for low pay. And we met racism. The riots in Notting Hill Gate in 1958 were evidence of this. But more than that, the economy was going into deeper and deeper recession. Unemployment was rising. The working people were getting restive. Among other things, the state reached for the weapon of racism. And by 1962, the first in a series of immigration acts was passed. Now, from that point on, a new pattern was set in British politics.
Again here, the ill feeling, of course, was spawned as a result of this act in which West Indians felt that they had now become second-class citizens. The open-door policy had been reversed. What is important to recognize now, it's not so much their feeling directed against the act as such, because they're responsible, the act is law, they're fighting to repeal it, but the consequences of the act, namely the fact that the population at large, because of the whole propaganda against the West Indians, regard them as second-class citizens, and they themselves, on the job, in virtually every sphere of life, find this difficulty since the Immigration Act in terms of discrimination, color bar housing, etc., etc.
The issue of immigration and immigrants came to be used quite deliberately by the state, whipping up racism and confusing the working class. So that despite the fact that immigration has been effectively stopped, and despite the fact that we've proved our worth to the economy, we are still the target of a very mischievous and hypocritical debate about our presence here, our right to be here.
The picture is not that of a province or corner of a country occupied by a distinct and growing population, though that would be perilous enough. The picture is of the occupation more and more intense of key areas, and it may be added of key functions, in the heartlands of the kingdom.
And I think it means that people are really rather afraid that this country might be rather swamped by people with a different culture. And you know, the British character has done so much for democracy, for law, and done so much throughout the world, that if there's any fear that it might be swamped, people are going to react and be rather hostile to those coming in.
We will fight you back, and we'll fight you with every bone, every nerve, every feeling, every ounce of blood we've got. We will have our country back!
There can't be any doubt that in many areas we have reach the absorptive capacity in respect of new immigrants. The load on our educational system, to say nothing of housing, health and welfare, is such that the strictest control is now necessary, and this is true irrespective of where the immigrants might come from. This would be true if they were coming from...
Looked at in terms of the history of race and immigration in this country, it says one thing to me. It says that what Enoch Powell says today, the Conservative Party says tomorrow, and the Labour Party legislates on the day after, with slight modifications.
I don't believe there is any person in this room who could be sincere that the Labour Party would be a vehicle for freedom. I have observed one thing about politics in Britain in regard to blacks. The Labour Party, because it says it's working class, and because we are working class, can't do certain things. They get the Tories to do it and then follow them afterwards.
The political parties in Britain today are closing ranks not only against blacks, but against the entire working class. They have to, because they face a working class that's refusing more and more to pay for their mistakes in the form of chronic unemployment, rising prices, cutbacks in social services. In other words, a working class that is suffering a real decline in its living standards.
Today we've had the news. Factory after factory, post after post, mine after mine, pit after pit.
At one level, the state has moved to control all forms of resistance. There's been state control of wages, limitations on the right to strike. At another level, we've seen politicians stepping up the use of racism to break up that resistance. Now, the crudest extension of this policy is seen in the rise of the fascist party, the National Front, which spreads racist ideas, suggesting that the 2 million Asians and Afro-Caribbeans who've worked here and are now settled here are responsible for the deepening crisis of the economy. In fact, blacks are under attack, not only as a part of the very bottom layer of the working class, because that's still where we are, massively represented after 20 to 25 years in this country. But we're also attacked in our communities. So it's not surprising, out of this dual oppression of class and race, that blacks are among the leading elements mobilizing in the working class against the government, against the state itself.
In the last year, the most serious of the attacks has been a firebombing and destruction of a bookshop on August the 10th. The bookshops obviously mean something to the National Front, the National Party, and the various fascist terrorists who are operating in the country at the present moment. And they're seeking to terrorize us out of existence. And we are saying they won't terrorize us out of existence. But we recognize the state has a certain responsibility, and we must bring it to the attention. Because if we were to arrange self-defense groups here, you can rest assured that the police will be attacking us and not the fascists who will be attacking our bookshops.
The National Front today throws bombs at black people's premises. They beat up black people, black young ladies on the street, and so on. So they are harmful, but in a sense, they're not the major threat to black people. Any black youth on the street will tell you that the major threat for them for all their lives in this country has been represented by the police, the blues, the men in uniform on the beat, who humiliate them every day, who pick them up on sus, who take them out to the station, who beat them. They all have, you know, every 1 out of 4 black youths has a story to tell.
David Olawale was a young Nigerian who came to this country with the intention of studying to become an engineer. He was kept out for some years of institutions of learning. He just couldn't get admission to an engineering college, partly because he was poor and couldn't pay, and therefore refusing to go into a factory, which was difficult enough, but He was unable to find work and slowly deteriorated to a tramp bum. During the course of his last 5 years, in a famous trial of Sergeant Kitchen and Sergeant Elliker, it was revealed that an entire police force in the city of Leeds had picked David Olawale for the most terrible persecution. They picked him up at night, they beat him, they urinated on him. Finally, they killed him, and they threw his body in the River Aire.
Why, when a Jamaican or a West Indian man picked up, why should he be beaten in the police station? Why should he be beaten? Ladies and gentlemen, we ask one question. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know we get ourselves in a few difficulties times, a bit of problem with the law. If we do something, we've been picked up at the police station, charged, but why should we be beaten up? Ladies and gentlemen, hang on a bit, will you please quiet? Now we've got proof here. 2 weeks ago, one of our brothers was assaulted by a number of men in Wolverhampton. So he decided to defend himself by protecting himself by carrying an offensive weapon. The Bible tells you, harm no man and let no man harm you. He walked with a chopper. He was picked up by the police. His brother was there. While his brother was there, his brother said to him, get in the police car and come up the station. Another set of officers came and they grabbed him by the neck, punched him in the face, broke his nose in the car, and he was beaten up. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please stow their men? This was his jacket, covered in blood. The police decided to take his clothes to wash it before he come to court. Mr. Buck, here it is. Here it is. This is proof. And he's still in jail, was remanded in custody. When he came up in court, he could hardly say, here is it, Mr. Buck. Here is it, ladies and gentlemen. Now we come back on the T-shirt. Here it is. So we took it here for each and every one of you to say this. Why should they be beaten up when they take in the police station?
Myself and my friend met, and we came down Oxford Street primarily to see about a job that I'd applied for in Boots and to see a girl who worked in Selfridges. We reached down here about 4:30, something like that, and went to Selfridges. We never met the girl because it had too many people, so we decided for me to go and see about the job. But before we went to see about the job, we went into CNA's to see about a coat for my friend to buy. When we came out of CNA's, I went to Boots to see about the job, and my friend went in Virgin Records on the corner to wait for me. After I'd seen about the job and came out and met him in Virgin Records, we came out of Virgin Records and turned the corner onto Edgware Road, where we saw my friend across the road at the bus stop. The traffic was too much, so we couldn't cross, so we just waved, said hello from across the road. We carried on walking down to Mr. International, where a man came in between us and put us against the window. He said he was a police officer and that we'd been followed from we came out of CNA. He said we was under arrest and said anything we said would be taken down and used in evidence against us. A police car pulled up in the centre of the road when a uniformed officer came across and escorted us to the car. We was taken down to the police station, searched, questioned and charged. The charge was suspected person of loitering with intent to commit an arrestable offence. After that we was put in a cell where we stayed for about 3 to 4 hours until my father came and collected us.
One of the most potent weapons that the police use against black youth is the charge of sus. That is, being a suspected person loitering with intent to commit a crime. And that's an offence which the police can pick someone up for if they think they're about to, not that they have, but are about to commit a crime. And the standard pieces of evidence used in practically all the cases I've ever heard of is, I saw the defendant wandering down bus queues, dipping in ladies' handbags, or I saw the defendant trying car doors. It's something which tends to be used against youth, either because the police think that they ought to be at school and are not, or ought to be at work and are not.
It is imperative from a general preventive point of view that any offender who is seen in such circumstances that he is a suspected person loitering with intent to commit this type of crime should be arrested before he does it rather than afterwards. And if you have got on occasions a number of arrests for suspicious persons, it is because that they are there in abundance at that particular time.
They heard the case, and whilst the case was going on, it's that when I knew what the police were really like. I never thought that they could lie so much. All the time the case was going on, the magistrate, he just didn't seem interested. He looks like he was just reading something or something like that on his desk in front of him. And that's how it went. When it came to giving us the sentence, or finding us guilty or innocent, all he said was, I don't believe a police officer would come to court and commit perjury, which just shows that he was intending to find us guilty all the time, because anything the police say, he would just take it as law.
It seems to me what the police have been doing, particularly in a whole series of incidents over the last few years, is launching an assault predominantly on black young people. Black young people whom the schools and the careers service, youth employment service within the schools have not persuaded to accept jobs which employers view as being the particular claim of black people. In other words, the situation in which a number of black immigrants from the Caribbean or Asia or wherever came to this country and accepted the worst jobs and continue to be largely at that level within the economy. That situation is not repeating itself because the children of those black people are refusing to accept those kinds of jobs. Now, it is at that level that they are in confrontation with the state and with the police as agents of the state.
I want to say, go! As if you were pointing and punching. Got it? Right, up to the firing line and adjust your earmuffs. You are loaded in the holsters, remember? Draw weapon. Right, that's it. Now stop looking at the gun, look at the target. That's the one who wants to kill you. Are you ready on the firing line? The line is ready. Stand by. Now, down, chant! Grabbing!
Well, if the police don't need any provocation or reason to arrest you as it is, if they see my face doing an interview like this, that is just asking for trouble. Because they would say, we don't want people like him who would tell the truth. Because there's hardly been any programs that I've seen where the truth has been really told. They don't want anyone telling the truth about the happenings that's going now. So it'd just be worse for me. I'd doubt if I'd be able to walk the streets.
very important elements in the police function in this country are, firstly, that we must never, in any circumstances, appear to be the tool of government or the tool of any political party. And secondly, I believe that in all disputes, whether they arise from politics or industry, I think we also must be clearly seen to be impartial. And as a policeman, I don't think that what we call crimes of violence, though they naturally give rise to a great deal of heart-searching and regret, I don't think that they are anything like as severe a threat to the maintenance of tranquility in this country as the tendency of people to use violence to achieve political or industrial ends. Now, as far as I'm concerned, as a policeman of many, many years of experience, that's the worst crime in the book. I think it's even worse than murder.
At one point, Britain was making 4 times as much profit out of one Caribbean island, which is sugar production, as it did out of all its trade with the rest of the world. So that was the level of profits that black people were generating into Britain. And it was only at this level of super profit that allowed the period is called the period of primitive accumulation. So there's so much money being made out of black people that the factory system could be paid for, the new kinds of machinery could be paid for, the new sort of production that brought into the world factory production, the new line system that expanded the world's economy to a degree that was unimaginable.
One of the things we have to remember about Britain today is that it's not so great anymore. Its empire has been taken away, and the economy is technically bankrupt. All that wealth that was accumulated here is basically gone, consumed, dispersed. The predicament of blacks highlights the inability of British capitalism to deliver the goods. In some of Britain's major cities, places like Manchester and Birmingham and London, official government statistics show that up to 80% of black youths between the ages of 16 and 19 are unable to find work and have no visible prospect of finding full-time employment. Now, significant numbers of these youths have turned to what is called street crime. They take what they're not given. They capture, in their own terms, in order to survive. In some cases, their resistance has led them to take on the monopoly might of the state itself, as, for example, in the case of Notting Hill Gate Carnival in London in 1976 and 1977, where there were pitched battles for the streets between the police and black youths. Now, it is impossible to pretend that this response of black youth is simply criminal activity. It becomes increasingly political.
the Spaghetti House siege of 1975, when 3 West Indian youth held up the Spaghetti House with guns for the first time that there had been such a siege in this country. It was very, very significant because one of them, Wesley Dick, used to be a voluntary worker here in the Institute of Race Relations. He used to help on the telephone and with Race Today. And the second person, Tony Monroe, was on the eve of going to Nigeria, I believe, on a medical scholarship.
Today's events confirm our original belief that this was an ordinary armed robbery with no racial or political connotations.
It has been, I mean, the press had tried to make out that this was part of the lumpen, spontaneous combustion element in the black community. Not so. And they were not irresponsible people in the sense that society understands it. They were responsive. I remember Wesley coming into the institute one day. He had been to a dance the previous night, and he was absolutely head up, and it was like an incubus on his brain. He said that a policeman had kicked a pregnant sister. And there was murder in his eyes. So it was not, however mistaken the siege might have been, how mistaken it was to be able to, I mean, you know, what they said was that they want to get monies to service the black community, the struggles of the black community. That is why they held up the Spaghetti House. They didn't want to thieve the Spaghetti House for their own pockets, to line their own pockets. What motivated them was the impossibility of living in this society with any sort of dignity, with any sort of family life, and be marked out as a section of the community which was totally undesirable, unwanted, rejected. That is the significance of the Spaghetti House siege. And that is only a part and parcel of the things that black youth have been saying. They have been saying in effect, they may not articulate it in these terms, they have been saying in effect, look, you want to reproduce the sub-proletariat that you imported into this country in our father's time. You now want to reproduce that same sub-proletariat and make us do the shit work that our parents did. And all that we can say to you is get stuffed. Fuck you. We're not going to do that.
People have hard work. Know that one and wash the other, so they say. So, join us, my brethren. Make the way for our children. Our children, our children, and their children. Their children, their children. Sure that they get life's best share.
In the months before October 1977, 2 young girls, black girls, had been apprehended by security guards and police officers and maltreated on suspicion of shoplifting. In particular, in October, a young girl went into the Boots chemist's shop in the precinct and was apprehended by the security guards and police and was seen by the public to be punched, hair pulled, and so on, maltreated, and was accused of having shoplifted inside of Boots the chemist. One day later, a large group of youths, perhaps 20 to 30 youths, turned up in the Moss Side precinct at the Boots chemist. They posted a guard, and they went into the Boots chemist, and they wrecked the joint completely. They attacked the security guard and the cashier, and they split. It was what one local newspaper, black newspaper, Bradford Black newspaper, is called a military operation.
Rodney, right here. Right. Over. John. Go on there. Alex, touch. Alex. All right, get organized now. Chang. Lock it. Nelson. Greg.
If a man robbed 1,500 pounds, I say power to him. And if the police grab him, I move to defend. Right? To me, it's not a case of guilty or not guilty. Yeah? It's whether we win or whether we don't. Right? On this, the police made a cock-up. They ain't got no friggin' evidence. No evidence whatsoever. So we're going to fight it on that level. But in our hearts, we ain't fighting it because, well, Tony or Jeffrey innocent. Huh? We're fighting it because they're black, and they're black youths, and we know we engage in a war. Tony, Jeffrey, Franklin, and Mark, when he gets sentenced, are prisoners of war. Because we have to take. We're unemployed, we ain't got. A lot of rich people got. And when we take, then they send down the law and the police and say you shouldn't take and so forth. Well, we have to get them out. It ain't for anybody in this room thinking about whether they're guilty or whether they're not guilty. I say they go somewhere else and think about it. That isn't the question. The question is they got 3 black youths, 3 of you. That means you're 3 short. Yeah? And the question is we get them out. And it's also the question of mounting some pressure on the arse of the police. Because they're taking a whole heap of friggin' liberties with you. Like Mrs. Ramsey said, they don't come pick up she. They come pick up you. And why they pick up you? Why? 1, because you're black. 2, because you ain't conforming. You ain't behaving how they like you to behave. You ain't running after job. Yeah? I see a whole heap of you wearing your Tams. They don't like it. Because you're trying to make out like you're different. Right? And they don't like difference. And when a policeman step on one of your foot, you step back. They say you're too uppity.
Yeah.
You won't sit down and take it like they want you to take it. You won't stay in your place. Yeah? That's why they're gunning for you. And Mrs. Ramsey and Desna. Well, Mrs. Ramsey's unique. Well, no, wrong. She's not unique. But she's one of an older generation. And I would have liked more parents to be here tonight. Because they care. They care. They show it in a different way, but they care. And the question, if more and more you are not going to end up inside, is whether we can get some power, yeah, to get the pigs off our back.
Our jailhouse. Our jailhouse. Our jailhouse. Our jailhouse. Our jailhouse. Our jailhouse. Our
The question of race has always been, right throughout the history of the last 400 years of the United Kingdom, a central political issue. Because either they were dealing with outside, how to conquer Africa, how to control black people in the Caribbean or elsewhere, or how to control black people here. So that when we look through the history of Britain, we see major deportations starting as long ago as 1596 and 1601, when Queen Elizabeth signed orders deporting black people. This is before the establishment of the United States of America, which has gained a reputation of being the leader in racism in the modern world. No, I think that the argument is clear that racism and the problem of race actually was imported from Britain to the United States with the Pilgrim Fathers. And that is a continuing strand of British history. So that the political battles around race represent an important and crucial part, a central issue of British life throughout the centuries.
That it began with this lot, you know what you are likely to say? Margaret Thatcher is evil, so is Jim Callaghan, So is still in the Liberal Party and Kingsley Reid and John Tildell and those. And if we get some nice people, everything is going to be all right. I don't want you to believe that. That if we get some blacks and put them in the exact position where those are, everything is going to be all right. I don't want you to believe that. And the only way you could go beyond that is if you understand that what we're dealing with is a system of exploitation of which those are only the political organizers. And if you go back to recall your own history, you would have met them before. I am addressing this meeting in English. I never knew any other language. It means I've been around these people all my life. This is not the first time that we're in confrontation with them. This is not the first time that they're focusing on us.
If I could add to that, I learned my politics in my mother's kitchen. The same woman who telling me to walk safely on the streets at night, not to go to those kind of places and mix with those kind of people, was the same woman who in her inspired moments telling me how she was burning cane fields in the 1940s against them.
Britain, mother of the empire, has had to welcome in her children and to allow them to settle. Because of racism, they have not been allowed to settle in a dignified manner. And because the blacks have refused to accept indignity and victimage, Britain is stuck with a rebellious black presence in its centers. And there is no way that Britain can get out of this situation. And what the blacks who've been born here are saying is that they intend to obtain their rights as dignified citizens here.
Our struggle, the struggle for what we want, we cannot get what we totally want in a capitalist Britain. I am not one for saying that because we can't get in a capitalist Britain, we go somewhere where we believe there is some socialism or something.
Capitalist Jamaica.
Right. Anywhere, any place, any time. We can't get it under capitalism, but then capitalism has to go.
Revolution.